In the midst of today's turbulent political scene, a striking new development has emerged that highlights the intense battles over power and accountability gripping the nation. Virginia State Senator Louise Lucas has suddenly become the focus of federal scrutiny, with her office in Portsmouth raided by the FBI alongside a nearby cannabis enterprise she has ties to. This action arrives at a pivotal moment, mere days following Virginia's approval of a groundbreaking 10-to-1 congressional map that she helped champion as a key advocate. That redistricting effort represented a bold Democratic strategy to safeguard representation and counter what many viewed as excessive Republican expectations for bolstering their House majority through map adjustments in traditionally conservative strongholds such as Texas, North Carolina, Missouri, Ohio, and Florida, with the Department of Justice staying largely silent on any formal charges or the investigation's details. It leaves room for speculation about motives. In my view, as someone who dives deep into these current affairs, the timing feels far from random, suggesting a troubling pattern where federal agencies might be deployed to pressure those who actively resist certain political maneuvers. It prompts us to ask whether this reflects genuine law enforcement priorities or something more calculated aimed at discouraging opposition. This latest episode doesn't stand alone, but rather aligns with a recurring theme that has defined much of the current administration's approach to governance. Observers have noted similar high-profile interventions targeting a range of individuals who have voiced criticism or taken stands against the White House, including former officials like James Comey, state attorneys general such as Letitia James, lawmakers like Adam Schiff, economic figures including Jerome Powell, governors like Tim Walz, and others such as Jacob Frey. The pattern raises alarms about the potential misuse of institutional authority, turning what should be an impartial system into a tool for addressing political grievances. Even former President Obama addressed this concern head-on in a recent conversation, underscoring the fundamental importance of keeping the Attorney General independent and focused on serving the American people rather than acting as an extension of presidential directives. He pointed out that while societies can weather misguided policies or imperfect electoral processes, the erosion of trust through the weaponization of justice strikes at the heart of democratic stability. It creates an environment where the immense authority of the state gets twisted to pursue personal or partisan vendettas, something no one should accept lightly if we value fair play and the rule of law. Looking ahead, especially with thoughts on what might unfold after this administration, the conversation naturally turns toward practical steps for rebuilding institutional trust. True progress in cleaning up the political landscape after periods of perceived overreach begins with a firm commitment to law enforcement integrity. Imagine a future Justice Department equipped with a dedicated squad of dedicated prosecutors and investigators specifically charged with examining and addressing any instances of misconduct or corruption from these recent years. This isn't about endless cycles of payback, but about establishing clear boundaries and sending a powerful message that such behaviors will not be tolerated moving forward. The goal would be swift and decisive action, contrasting with earlier approaches that sometimes prioritized appearances over thorough pursuit of facts. For instance, controversies like the handling of certain corruption probes involving city leaders illustrate how loyalty demands can undermine public service, leading even experienced lawyers to step away in protest. Ultimately, restoring faith means prioritizing accountability not just to punish past wrongs, but to prevent them from becoming normalized. Ensuring that future leaders understand the boundaries of their influence and that everyday citizens feel protected by a system that operates without favoritism. As these discussions on justice and reform unfold, another layer of elite-level accountability has captured attention through congressional oversight efforts. In a recent closed-door session, Congressman Ro Khanna grilled Howard Lutnick, a high-ranking figure in the administration, regarding his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. What emerged painted a picture of evasive responses and potential inconsistencies that have sparked widespread concern. Lutnick had publicly stated he had no contact with Epstein after a certain point, yet records pointed to a family visit to Epstein's Island years later. When challenged, he reportedly distinguished his personal involvement from that of his relatives, implying one standard for himself and another for his loved ones. Further questions about Epstein's alleged practices of recording interactions and using them for leverage were met with claims that these were mere offhand speculations from a podcast, later walked back after internal consultations. Khanna described the exchange as lacking candor, more like a coordinated effort to downplay involvement rather than provide full disclosure. He drew comparisons to how similar cases have led to prosecutions and resignations among royalty and business elites abroad, questioning why domestic standards seem to allow sitting officials to remain in place despite such revelations. The call for resignation was clear, emphasizing that failing to hold figures like this responsible reflects poorly on national values and perpetuates a sense of unequal justice. Khanna advocated strongly for future public testimony, noting that while the session was recorded in transcript form, bringing it into the open could force greater honesty, especially given the personal stories from survivors who continue to seek recognition and support. This push for openness extends to broader demands for releasing extensive files related to the Epstein case, many of which remain sealed despite existing laws mandating transparency. Progress has stalled, with legal challenges and administrative hurdles creating roadblocks. Yet voices like Khanna's, working alongside some bipartisan allies, insist on incremental advances, such as compelling additional witnesses to appear and exploring court avenues to enforce compliance. The underlying frustration stems from a perception that powerful networks protect their own, leaving victims marginalized in a system that claims to value equality. It highlights how these issues intersect with larger questions of influence and whether those in elevated positions face the same scrutiny as ordinary citizens. From my perspective, tracking these threads, the reluctance to fully disclose information only deepens public skepticism, making it harder to rebuild confidence in oversight mechanisms. Compounding these challenges is a seismic shift in the electoral landscape triggered by a recent Supreme Court decision that significantly curtailed aspects of the Voting Rights Act. This ruling has prompted a flurry of activity among Republican-controlled legislatures in southern states like Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, Tennessee, and South Carolina, where officials are rushing to revise district boundaries. The potential outcomes are stark. In the immediate term for upcoming midterms, it could secure a small but critical number of extra seats for one party that might otherwise remain competitive. Over the longer horizon, however, the effects could reshape Congress dramatically, potentially erasing many districts designed to amplify minority voices and leading to a loss of up to a third of seats held by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Analysts such as Dan Pfeiffer have broken this down thoughtfully, noting how even in already heavily drawn maps, further adjustments risk creating vulnerabilities, but overall tilt the playing field toward greater Republican structural edges, already present in the Senate and presidential elections. This would mean a less diverse legislative body, with reduced representation for communities of color, and a Congress that feels increasingly disconnected from the nation's demographic realities. Pfeiffer emphasizes that while short-term calculations for House control matter, the enduring consequences threaten the foundational principle of equitable participation in democracy. In response, thoughtful voices are urging Democrats and reformers to consider comprehensive changes to the judicial system itself as a safeguard. Court reform emerges as a multifaceted strategy, encompassing basic measures like enforceable ethics guidelines to address apparent conflicts and undue influences that have eroded public faith. Term limits offer another avenue, potentially allowing justices to transition to senior roles without disrupting lifetime appointments entirely, drawing on established practices in lower courts. The most ambitious and debated option involves adjusting the court's size to align with the expanded federal circuit structure that has evolved over centuries, ensuring broader perspectives and countering the effects of long tenures that lock in ideologies for decades. Pfeiffer acknowledges the political difficulties, including low public familiarity with these ideas and opposition, framing them as extreme, but argues for keeping them on the table strategically. Rather than fixating on one element, the focus should be on building a narrative around a judiciary that prioritizes corporate and elite interests over everyday concerns, using it to energize voters around protecting voting access and policy gains. This approach recognizes that even with unified government control, challenges like the filibuster or judicial review persist, making proactive planning essential for any lasting impact. At the state level, these national pressures are inspiring direct action from unlikely challengers who embody a push for responsiveness. In Maryland, for example, Bobby Lapin, a veteran, former firefighter and educator with no prior elected experience, is mounting a spirited campaign against the entrenched state Senate President Bill Ferguson. The central demand is for an immediate special session to address redistricting, positioning Maryland as a proactive defender of democratic principles in response to aggressive moves by other states. Lapin points out that inaction by Democratic leaders in safe blue areas risks ceding ground in the broader power struggle, allowing opponents to engineer lasting advantages. He has been vocal about Ferguson's perceived delays on multiple fronts, from advancing protections for reproductive choices following landmark court changes to strengthening community safeguards against federal overreach in immigration matters. As an outsider facing significant financial and organizational headwinds, including heavy corporate backing for his opponent and external influences, Lapin frames the contest as a classic people versus establishment battle. His vision centers on curbing the sway of big donors in decision-making, prioritizing policies that uplift families, small enterprises, and those facing economic strains amid rising living costs. He draws from his service background to argue that extraordinary circumstances call for bold responses, rejecting the notion that one party should unilaterally disarm while others advance their agendas unchecked. This race, though local, carries national echoes, demonstrating how grassroots energy can challenge complacency and rally support around core values of fairness and representation. Throughout these developments, from federal raids and elite inquiries to map redraws and reform debates, a common thread emerges about the fragility of democratic norms under pressure. Power dynamics are shifting in ways that test institutional resilience, often favoring those already positioned at the top. It serves as a reminder that vigilance and active participation remain vital, whether through supporting reform-minded candidates or demanding transparency from leaders across the board. In the end, these events invite us to pause and reflect on the kind of nation we aspire to build, one where justice remains blind to politics and representation truly reflects the people's will. Will we muster the resolve to demand better, or allow these patterns to define our future? The choice, as always, rests with informed citizens willing to engage and push for accountability.